Hey everyone, in this video we have our basic music manager working, but I actually want to do a refactor here. Instead of keeping an audio source on my music manager, we're going to need to handle multiple audio sources so that we can manage stacking our different music layers. And because I don't want to put too much into the music manager, I think instead of doing like audio source, source 2 and source 3, and then, having a totally different grouping of sources for a song, I actually want to define something called a music player, which is going to handle all of my individual audio sources associated with a music track. So in other words, where we're setting up our audio source here, we actually want this to be a music player that we can say musicplayer.play. And then inside of our music player, we can keep track of all the audio sources and the blending and all that other stuff. So we need to do a little change inside of our script. So let's set up our music player. So the first thing is let's define it in a new script, music player. And we'll take this music player and we're going to wrap it again inside of our namespace, SoundSystem. Now, because we want our music player to be attached to something as a script, I'm going to keep this as a mono behavior. I also anticipate doing some coroutine blending animation kind of stuff. So we'll just leave this on here for now. Later on, if we decide we don't want mono behavior, that's totally fine. We can refactor later. But the first thing we want to do is keep track of a grouping of audio sources. And to do that, we're just going to make a list because we're going to create this at runtime. Like we want the music manager to define how many audio sources we make. So I'm not going to specify that in the music player. I'm just going to keep track of a grouping. We'll just call these layer sources and we will just initialize it here. It's fine. Inside of awake, whenever we first attach this music player to a game object, we want to set up our audio sources, meaning that we're just going to create them here. Remember, in the end, we want our music manager to be able to create itself the first time it's called. So music manager will attach the music manager script to the game object, relabel the game object, and then assign the instance. But we also want to set up our music players right here, which means that instead of audio source, we actually want to add a music player. And then whenever the music player gets added, it will also call it's awake, where we will add the audio sources. So I'm going to save this script. I'm going to hop back over to the music manager and I'm going to change this. I'm going to double click, right click, rename, call this music player. And for this to be accurate, I'm also going to change this to music player. So this is now a type of music player, not a type of audio source. Remember, we're going to break our audio sources out down further into our music player. So we come down here, we can just look at the errors to know where to find our fixes and replacement. Music player is equal to game object add component music player, right? Not audio source. And then right here, we're not directly accessing a audio source yet. We are going to pass in our music event into the music player. So we'll just comment this out for now. So we define it a little bit more. Maybe we could add a little to-do play from music player if we want. And if we want to build that connection right now, we could just say public void play. And then we're just going to pass this through again. Music events. And then again, because we want our music player to keep track of its own fade time, because we may want one track to fade out while another track is fading in. We don't really want to drive that from a music manager. We just want each music player to be independent and be able to respond to a larger command from a music manager. So if we're receiving it here, let's just, come back over here and again, pass it through. So we'll say music player, which is a reference to this music player component that we added. Now there's nothing inside of here, right? Like this is just an empty class that we haven't put anything in yet. Again, we're just building the connection. So we'll just say play. Give it music event. Give it our fade time. Okay, we've created that. Hop back over. And now we can start to bring our audio source stuff that we did here, we can bring that into our music player if we want. Okay. And also I'm going to take my debug.log statement and I'm going to move it one level deeper because I just want to make sure that I hit this point in the code. Like we know that we're already hitting this point and I think we're fine. Come over here, music player. Now that we've gone all the way in, and when we play our track from our music event, we assume that we will hit this point, and we'll test that in a little bit. Let's actually set up our audio sources like we defined here. So let's make a separate method for, we can call this setup audio sources or create layers. Specifically, we're creating them, right? So let's just say create. Now this doesn't exist yet, so let's double click, void, alrighty, create and attach a few audio sources. Sometimes I like to type out what I want to do in plain English before I actually put it into code just to keep myself on track. So to do that, we can do a simple for loop. So I press enter and then I did tab twice and that will just autofill it out pretty quickly. And what we can do here is we want to determine the number of times we want to run this loop. So each time we run the loop, we want to create an audio source, attach it, add it to our list here, and then do any kind of setup we want. Now the thing is, we don't necessarily know how many we want to create. Now we could put this in the music player and the music player could define how many audio sources it should create, and that would be a perfectly reasonable way to do it. I actually think I want to put that in the music manager because I want the music manager to control the total number of layers that any music player can create. And the reason is because I just want one place to go to do some overall settings changes to our music manager system. So for example, up here, I might want to say something like public. We'll make this a constant because we don't necessarily want to change the max number of layers at runtime. We just want to keep this consistent. If you did want to change that at runtime, you could do a more complex setup and that's fine. You wouldn't do a constant. Constant just means that it won't change once it's been defined. But for us, we'll just put it here, meaning that if we want to change this value, we need to change it on this line where we initialize it. So we'll just say, because this is public, capital max layer count is equal to, and then we'll give it a number. So this is the max number of layers that any music event can have. Even if we define more inside of our music event, this is the only max amount allowable for actually playing. So we could actually, if we want to optimize more, we could turn this down to 2. If we want to optimize less efficiently, we could turn this up and just give more control to the designer. But in the end, we want to control this at this one point. So inside of our music player, for our length here, again, you could actually put the layer count on the music player, but I just wanted to make this easier to hunt down. To access this, all we need to do is say music manager, and because this is a constant, we can actually access that without going through the instance. So we would just say music manager dot max layer count right there. So now we are pulling the number of audio sources to create from the music manager, and we can just define that there. So that's how we'll set that up. And then for each one, set up this audio source. So we will create a new one and add it to our list of audio sources right here. So we'll say layer source. What do we call it? Oh, let's actually relabel this right here. Hold on. Double click just in case we use this anywhere, but looks like we didn't. Just to show you, double click, right click, rename. We'll call this _ layer sources, just to be more clear. So what we want to do here is we want to add a audio source component, add component audio source to the game object. But we also want to store it inside of our list, right? Like this is our list of layer sources. Technically, you could do some like weird searching or something after, but why not just hold on to it at the moment that we create it? It would just be easier that way. So layer sources dot add to our list, and we'll just add the one that we create, just like that. So we'll add it to this game object. So we'll literally add a component audio source and then hold on to it. And we're going to run this 3 times because that's our max layer count. So we'll add, store, add, store, add, store. So we'll have 3 audio sources. You know, we probably could test this real quick. So if I save, I come down here, let it compile, hit play. You'll see if I press Q, I come down to my music singleton, and you'll see we created our music manager because it handles itself. The music manager creates the music player. So the music player handles itself, which is create the different audio sources needed. So because we defined it as 3 layers, we created 3 different audio sources. And now when we create these audio sources, we could also set them up. So we would say, set up this audio source right here. And that would be, you know, what are the things that we would want to ensure to make sure that this is set up to play music? Well, we may want to say, once we've added it, layer sources, this current index, since we're this time through the loop. We could say plan awake. It's false because we want to control when it plays. We don't want it to automatically start playing when we create it because we haven't technically, we don't know for sure that we've hit the play button yet. We just know that we've accessed the music manager somehow. We also do want it to loop. I cannot think of a time in which we would not want a music track to loop unless we wanted it to like go through a playlist or something, but that would be a more complex setup. So we'll change that later if we need to, if we want to add that functionality. But for now, we'll just say loop is true, plan awake, false, true. Okay, so we're creating all of our layer sources. Now, because we know that we have our 3 layer sources set up, now we need to actually play. So we're kind of moving our play function down here. And what we really want to do is we want to tell all of our audio sources to play the audio clip associated with its layer. Meaning, if I minimize this, I come into here, I hit play, hit Q. So what we want to happen is each of these audio sources, we want to assign the audio clip associated with each layer. So we want this to be the first layer, this to be the second layer, that to be the third layer, and we want to tell them all to play simultaneously. And that will just correspond with, you know, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and just tell them all 3 to play at the same time. So we're just kind of passing that into the audio source, into the different layers. To do that, we'll come into our play method. Remember, we're getting all the way here, but this is the point where we actually need to play the music. And we'll play that in all of our audio sources we just created. So simple enough, we'll do another for loop, again, type for, and then press tab twice, and this will auto complete that out for you. So what we want to do is we want to assign the clips according to our layer sources.count. We don't want to go further than the number of layer sources we have. In addition, we don't want to try and pull a clip from a music layer that has not been defined yet. So in other words, if we had I don't know, just another music event. If we had a music event, whatever. If we had a music event that only had 2 layers, for example, we wouldn't want to try and pull a third layer that doesn't really exist and put that into an audio source. It doesn't really know. So we only want to go up to the point of both our audio sources are available and our layers are available. Otherwise, we just want to stop at the moment where like we don't have any more. So if we don't have any more layers, we'll stop there. If we don't have any audio sources, we'll stop there. Hopefully that makes sense. But that's the idea here is I want to make sure that I have enough of both before I do this. Break this into a separate statement that says if we are less than the music event dot music layers dot length. It's kind of a little bit weird here, but I'll say let's do this. Let's break it out into its own line like that. Let's actually do this. I think that's a little cleaner. For start at 0, if I is less than our layer sources count, so this will be the number of layer sources we have, and I is also less than the length of our number of layers inside of our music event asset, then continue and run this. We'll also do another layer of protection here. If music layer is properly filled out. And what I mean by this is, let's see if we go into our song right here. This would mean if I had done a null here, we wouldn't necessarily want to reassign something if it's null. We just skip it. Don't worry about it. Trying to protect ourselves a little bit. It might be fine, but I don't want to do it unnecessarily and protect myself in the future. So maybe we call this if we have content in music layer, assign it if music event dot music layers, our current index, right? Like we're going through each one. If our music event asset, if we have something in the layer, right? It's not null, we have something in the layer, then fill it. And we'll say layer sources i.clip. Remember, we're putting this into the clip. It's equal to music event, music layers, right? So we're just aligning this so that our index is the same. So at the same index of our layer sources, we're assigning that to the same index of our music event layers. Again, just audio source matching with the music event layer clip. We'll assign that and then tell it to play. We're just aligning our audio source index with our music layer index and then filling it in and telling it to play one by one. So we'll go through, if there's something to play, it'll fill it and then play it, and we'll go through all three of our audio sources. I think this will do it. Let's save it and see what happens. So what should happen is, just to remind ourselves, inside of our SoundSystem tester, each of these music events will have three different layers. You could do 2 or 4 if you want, whatever. We'll have our layers. And then when we create this, our song will create a music player that will create an audio source for each of these layers. And then when we press play, it'll assign each of these layers into its own audio source and play them all simultaneously. So let's hit play. Come down here and press the Q button. So you can hear that it actually did that. And we'll do the same thing with the other song as well. Okay, cool. So we have our layers playing properly. Now we're still not doing any kind of blending or anything fancy, but we are setting ourselves up to do that. So you can see that if we, play our track, I'm gonna pause it there so you can hear me. At this point, we are slotting in each of our different music event layers into appropriate audio sources. We know that they're playing and they're all synchronized. Now, if we wanted to do blending, all we'd need to do is animate all of the audio sources simultaneously. We'd automate their volumes up and down. Now, the cool thing is this also allows us to do something like, this one could be 1 and these volumes could be 0, but they're still aligned because they're technically playing, you just can't hear them. If we wanted to fade in the next layer, we could just, while this one's playing at full, we could animate this one up. Then we want to fade in the next one, we could fade this one up. So we're setting ourselves up to have more control. We're just not taking advantage of it yet. But we have our system a little bit more fleshed out, right? Like this is the core of it. We have our music manager activates a music player. The music player synchronizes their audio sources, and then it feeds in a music event that will go in and get processed. So one more step towards building our tool, a little bit more functionality. I'm hoping that with each of these videos, we get just a little bit more functionality to your tool. Obviously, you can customize this as much as you want, but I recommend that if you're trying to stick through the entire series, just go to the very end, and then at the very end, if you want to deviate and just change the code, then at that point you can, because I hope that you do customize this tool a little bit more to make it your own. Just to make it easier to resolve bugs as we continue to add functionality. At this point, we'll just continue to add with each passing video.